The courtroom was cold. My mother sat 15 feet away, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, performing grief like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. Lauren has always been financially irresponsible, she told the judge. We're just trying to protect her from herself. Their lawyer smiled the kind of smile that said this was already over. For 7 years, my family never asked a single question about my life. Not one phone call to see if I was okay. Not one text asking what I was building. They called my startup a side hustle. They told me to get a real job, to stop embarrassing the family. Then Calendar Flow sold for $10 million. Suddenly, they remembered they were my parents. Suddenly, they wanted half. I watched my mother cry on command, watched my father nod solemnly, watched their lawyer shuffle papers with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. He hadn't seen what was on my phone yet. 200 voicemails. 7 years of silence, except when they needed something. Have you ever saved proof of your own heartbreak, not knowing why, until suddenly you did? My name is Lauren Chambers. I'm 36 years old, and until recently I was invisible to my own family. I spent 12 years building a software company called Calendar Flow from my tiny apartment, working nights and weekends while holding down a day job in IT support. Last month I sold that company for $10 million. And now, for the first time in my life, my phone won't stop ringing. I sat in my apartment that evening, watching the screen light up again. 47 missed calls in 24 hours, all from family members who hadn't bothered to check on me in years. The acquisition announcement wasn't even public yet. Someone must have heard something, told someone else, and suddenly I existed again. I poured myself a cup of tea and let the phone buzz on the kitchen counter. I wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. I'd been preparing for this moment for 7 years, and I wanted to savor the silence just a little longer. The memories came flooding back as I watched that phone vibrate. I thought about the day I earned my college scholarship, a full ride, the proudest moment of my young life. I rushed home to tell my parents, heart pounding with excitement. But when I sat down at dinner, my mother barely glanced at me. Derek had scored the winning goal in his middle school soccer game that afternoon, and that was all anyone wanted to discuss. When I tried to share my news, my mother held up her hand. That's nice. Honey. Derek, tell us more about the game. I learned something important that night. In our family, there was room for only one star, and it was never going to be me. 3 years later, I learned an even harder lesson. I had saved $30,000 from that scholarship money meant for graduate school, for my future. But Derek failed several classes his freshman year. He needed a private tutor, a new laptop, a fresh start at a different school. My mother sat me down with that look she always used when she wanted something. Don't be selfish, Lauren. You'll figure it out, you always do. She made it sound like a compliment. It wasn't. It was a sentence. My role in this family had been decided. I was the one who provided, who sacrificed, who disappeared so others could shine. Years passed. I worked. I saved. I started building something of my own, a simple scheduling software for small businesses. At 29, during a rare family dinner, I made the mistake of mentioning it. My father didn't even look up from his plate. Get a real job. Stop embarrassing us with your little hobby. My mother patted my hand with that pitying smile I knew so well. Sweetheart, you're not the business type. Some people are just support players. There's no shame in that. Nobody asked what I was building. Nobody cared enough to wonder. That same evening, while helping clean up, I noticed something strange in an old photo album. In several pictures, a woman had been deliberately cut out. I could see the scissors marks along the edges. When I asked about it, my mother's face went rigid. That was your Aunt Grace. She passed away a long time ago. Mental illness. Very sad. We don't talk about her. But I noticed her hands were shaking. She couldn't meet my eyes. That night I searched online for Grace Chambers. I looked for obituaries, death records, funeral notices. I found nothing. My aunt wasn't dead. She had been erased. I didn't understand why, but something told me to save what I'd found. I created a folder on my computer and labeled it simply, Questions. I looked at my phone again, 47 missed calls. For the first time in years, I allowed myself a small smile. They wanted something from me now. And for the first time in my life, I was the one holding all the cards. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever they were planning had been in motion far longer than I realized. The truth about my family's planning came to me slowly, in pieces, over 12 long years. It started when I was 24, 2 years out of college, still working my first real job in IT support. I had saved enough for a down payment on a used car, nothing fancy, just reliable transportation to get me to work. The dealership ran my credit, and the salesman came back looking confused. He said there must be some mistake with my credit score. I told him to run it again. He did. Same result. I drove home that night without a car, pulled my own credit report, and discovered that someone had taken out a $50,000 personal loan in my name when I was 22. I had never signed anything. I had never seen a single statement. But I recognized the address on the application. It was my parents' house. They had used their own address so they could intercept every piece of mail, every bank notice, every collection warning. For 2 years, while I was struggling to build my life, they had been hiding this from me. The debt had destroyed my credit before I even knew it existed. My first instinct was to call the police. I actually dialed the number. My finger hovered over the call button for a long time, but I couldn't press it. If I reported this, my mother would be arrested. There would be a trial, news coverage, public humiliation for everyone, and I knew exactly how it would play out. I would be painted as the ungrateful daughter who sent her own mother to prison. My relatives would take sides. I would become the villain in a story where I was the victim. So I made a different choice. I would pay the debt myself, not because I owed it, but because I refused to owe them anything. No leverage, no guilt, no connection they could use against me later. But I also made myself a promise that night. I would document everything from that moment forward. Every phone call, every text message, every interaction with my family would be recorded and saved. If they ever tried anything like this again, I would have proof. I started a folder on my computer. I saved the loan documents, the credit reports, everything showing the address they had used. This was not weakness. This was strategy. The next 5 years nearly broke me. From 24 to 29, I worked 2 jobs. IT support during the day, freelance web development at night. I lived on instant ramen and off-brand cereal. I shared apartments with strangers because I could not afford my own place. Every dollar I did not absolutely need went toward that debt. I paid off the original $50,000 plus interest, nearly $65,000 total. I never told anyone what I was doing or why. I never confronted my family about the loan. I simply disappeared from their radar, stopped visiting, stopped calling, stopped existing in their world. And that was exactly what I wanted. The less they thought about me, the safer I was. When I was 29, finally debt-free, I started building something of my own. My idea was simple: scheduling software for small businesses, the kind of mom and pop shops that could not afford expensive solutions. I built it alone, working nights and weekends while keeping my day job. I called the company Calendarflow, with no mention of Chambers anywhere. I kept my LinkedIn private. When I attended industry events, I used my middle name, Marie. I was building something real, something that could change my life, and I was determined that my family would never know about it until I was ready for them to know. During those 7 years of building, my family never once called to ask how I was doing, but they called constantly when they needed something. I saved every voicemail they left. Over 7 years, I collected 200 messages. I even categorized them: 47 requests for money, 89 requests for favors like scheduling appointments or picking up groceries, 41 guilt trips about missing holidays or not calling enough. Actual conversations asking about my life, my health, my happiness. 0. Not one single message contained the words "I love you." Not one asked, "Are you okay?" I saved them all. Every single one. In my 5th year of building Calendarflow, we hit 10,000 paying customers. A local television station did a small segment on rising tech entrepreneurs, and I appeared briefly on camera. They introduced me as Marie Chambers, founder of Calendarflow. I thought I was safe, but a cousin saw the segment and sent the link to my mother with a note asking if this was her Lauren. My mother never opened the link. She replied that it was probably some other Chambers, that Lauren worked in IT support, that I was not the business type. The cousin, perhaps sensing something was off, forwarded that exchange to me. I saved it too. My own mother could not imagine me succeeding. She did not even bother to click a link and find out. Then, in my 6th year, everything changed. I received an email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, "From someone who understands." The message was short, but it shook me to my core. It said, "Lauren, you don't know me, but I've been watching from a distance. I saw you on the news last year. You look so much like I did at your age. I know what they did to you. I know because they did it to me first, 30 years ago. Your Aunt Grace isn't dead. I'm very much alive. I've been living in Portland, Oregon, rebuilding my life since they erased me. I have so much to tell you, but only when you're ready. They're going to come for you eventually. When they do, I'll be here, with proof. It was signed simply, Grace. I read that email 5 times. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. For the first time in years, I felt something I had forgotten was possible. I was not alone. Someone else had survived this family. I replied with just 3 words, not yet. But soon. That same year, something else unexpected happened. Derek, my brother, sent me a strange text message. There was no request for money, no favor needed. He just wrote, "Hey sis." Random, but just be careful with any money stuff around mom and dad, okay? Don't sign anything they ask you to sign. I stared at that message for a long time. Was this a warning? Did he know something I did not? I replied with a simple okay and saved the screenshot. I did not understand what he meant then, but I would understand later. In my 7th year, a Fortune 500 company contacted me. They wanted to acquire Calendar Flow for $10 million. My software now served 25,000 businesses across the country. The deal was real, but it required going public with my real name. Once this news broke, my family would know everything. I had spent 7 years preparing for this moment, building my evidence, saving my proof, waiting for the day when I would finally be free. I thought I was ready, but I did not yet know how far they had already planned to go, or how long they had been planning it. The acquisition closed on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, the press release was everywhere. Calendar Flow acquired for $10 million founder Lauren Chambers becomes overnight success story. Local news picked it up first, then regional outlets. Then my phone started ringing and did not stop. Relatives I had not heard from in a decade suddenly remembered my number. Cousins sent congratulations through text messages filled with exclamation points. And then my mother called. Her voice was warm, almost tender, dripping with a sweetness I had never heard directed at me before. I always knew you had it in you, sweetheart. Your father and I are so proud. We should celebrate this together, as a family. 7 years of silence. 7 years of being told I was not the business type, and now she was proud. I felt nothing but cold recognition as I listened to her performance. I had seen her act this way before, just never for my benefit. She was good at this. She had been practicing her whole life. What nobody knew, what I had never told anyone, was that this was not my first offer. 2 years earlier, a different company had offered me $8 million for Calendar Flow. We negotiated for weeks. Everything was nearly finalized until I noticed one clause buried deep in the contract. It would have given the buyer veto power over my personal financial decisions for 3 years after the sale. My lawyer thought I was insane for walking away over a single clause. But he did not understand what I understood. I had spent 5 years of my life paying off a debt I never agreed to, watching someone else's decisions destroy my credit and my future. I swore I would never let anyone control my finances again. So I walked away from $8 million and bet on myself. 2 years later, I sold for $10 million with no strings attached. That clause would have cost me my freedom. I chose patience instead. The family pride lasted exactly 1 week before it transformed into pressure. My father called first. He said a daughter with my resources should help her family, maybe buy a bigger house where we could all live together. My mother followed with her own suggestion. She said Derek had a wonderful business idea and just needed startup capital, maybe $200,000. Family invests in family, she reminded me. Even Derek reached out, asking to grab dinner so he could pitch me something. I declined everything politely but firmly. I told them I needed time to process the sale, that my finances were complicated, that I would think about it. The temperature dropped immediately. The calls became more frequent, more insistent, more desperate. Then, suddenly, they stopped completely. The silence worried me more than the pressure had. My family never went quiet unless they were planning something. I hired a private investigator. Not because I was paranoid, but because I knew these people. I knew how they operated. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before they made their next move. The report arrived 2 weeks later, and what I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about my own life. Among the documents was a life insurance policy taken out on me when I was 17 years old. My parents were listed as the sole beneficiaries. I had never been told about this policy. I had never signed anything, and I could not have signed anything, because I was a minor at the time. My parents had signed on my behalf. For 19 years, they had held a policy that would pay them if I died. They had been paying the premiums faithfully every single year, never missing a payment, treating it like an investment. I stared at that document for a very long time. This was not opportunism. This was not greed that appeared when money became available. This was planning. They had been planning to profit from me since before I turned 18. I was never their daughter. I was always just an asset to them, something to extract value from, whether I was alive or dead. The investigator found something else. Financial records showing my father had sold his car 6 months earlier. My mother had sold her jewellery around the same time. There were large, unusual cash withdrawals from their bank account, amounts that did not match their normal spending patterns. And then there was a text message that Derek had accidentally sent to the wrong group chat. A cousin had forwarded it to me without commentary. The message read, "Dad's gambling thing is out of control. He owes like $200K to some really bad people. They gave him 60 days. That's why Mom is going crazy about Lauren's money." I read that message 3 times. My father owed $200,000 to dangerous people. They had given him 60 days to pay, and my $10 million was their exit strategy. The lawsuit was not about family love. It was not even about greed in the traditional sense. It was about desperation. I was their last hope, and they were willing to destroy me to save themselves. 2 weeks after the call stopped, a process server appeared at my door. My parents were suing me. The lawsuit made 2 claims. First, they alleged fraudulent concealment, saying I had deliberately hidden my business success to avoid family financial obligations. Second, they claimed unjust enrichment, arguing that the $30,000 they had taken from my scholarship savings was actually a family investment in my future. They were demanding the return of that principal plus 15 years of appreciation, totaling $2.5 million. The lawsuit was filed by a lawyer I did not recognize. He was not a high-powered attorney from a prestigious firm. He was someone who worked on contingency, betting on a big payday if he won. I later learned that the loan shark my father owed money to had recommended this lawyer. Everyone wanted a piece of my success. Everyone had a plan to take what I had built. The night before the trial was the hardest night of my life. I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the wall, wondering how it had come to this. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. It said, "You've always been my greatest disappointment. Even with all that money, you're still the selfish girl you've always been. Your father could go to prison because of his debts, and you don't even care. Some daughter you are." I read that message again and again. 20 years of silence, sacrifice, and solitude crashed over me like a wave. For one terrible moment, I considered ending all of it. Just pay them, give them whatever they wanted, make the pain stop. I opened my laptop and started drafting an email to my lawyer, telling him I wanted to withdraw from the case and settle. Then I saw the folder on my desktop. Evidence. 7 years of voicemails. The identity theft documents. The life insurance policy. The emails from Aunt Grace. Derek's warning text. I thought about the girl who had paid off $65,000 alone without telling anyone. The girl who had built a company from nothing while working 2 jobs. The girl who had kept every receipt, every voicemail, every piece of cruelty, because she knew deep down that this day would eventually come. If I gave up now, I would spend the rest of my life paying them. But if I stood up now, it ended here. I closed the email draft, deleted it, went to bed. The next morning, I put on my best suit. I packed a tablet containing 200 voicemails, a forged loan application, a life insurance policy I never signed, and 15 years of documented cruelty. I walked into the courthouse alone. For the first time in 36 years, I was not staying silent to keep the peace. I was going to tell the truth, every piece of it, and I was going to make them answer for all of it. The trial lasted 3 days. 3 days that would undo 36 years of lies. On the first morning, I sat at the defendant's table and watched my mother take the stand. She was dressed conservatively, her hair neatly styled, a tissue clutched in her hand like a prop. Their attorney opened with a portrait of loving, sacrificing parents who had given everything to their ungrateful daughter. Then my mother began to speak, and the tears started flowing on command. She talked about birthday parties and family vacations. She described years of devotion and support. She said they had sacrificed so I could succeed, and now that I had money, I had abandoned the family that made me. The judge listened carefully. I watched my mother cry, without making a sound, lie without hesitation, perform the role of loving mother with the ease of someone who had been practicing her whole life. And for the first time I saw her clearly. This woman was never my mother. She was an actress who sometimes played one when it suited her needs. My attorney requested permission to play audio evidence during cross-examination. The judge allowed it. The courtroom fell silent as the first voicemail filled the room. My mother's voice, sharp and dismissive. "Don't bother calling unless it's important. I'm busy with your brother's college applications." Then another, "You think you're something special? Know your place, Lauren." And another, "We need $500 by Friday. Don't be difficult." The messages kept playing. "If you can't be there for Thanksgiving, don't bother coming for Christmas either. What will people think?" And finally, the most recent one, recorded just weeks before the lawsuit. "If you don't help this family, you're dead to us." You hear me? Dead. The loving family narrative disintegrated in real time. My mother tried to interrupt, shouting that those messages were taken out of context, but the judge silenced her immediately. The damage was already done. Everyone in that courtroom had heard the truth in her own voice. On the second day, my attorney presented the loan documents. The $50,000 personal loan taken out in my name when I was 22. A certified handwriting expert took the stand and testified that the signature was a forgery. More importantly, he explained that the handwriting on the application itself matched samples from my mother, PTA sign-up sheets, church volunteer forms, documents that had been subpoenaed during discovery. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. Bank records confirmed that the loan proceeds had been deposited directly into an account controlled by my parents. My attorney turned to my mother on the witness stand and asked her directly, "Did you forge your daughter's signature to take out this loan?" Her lawyer objected immediately. The judge overruled. The courtroom waited in silence. My mother's face went pale. Then she spoke. "Aye, we needed the money." Lauren would have said yes, anyway. We're family. It was not a denial. It was a confession. My attorney presented the life insurance policy next, taken out when I was 17 years old. My parents were listed as the sole beneficiaries along with my brother Derek. I had never signed anything because I could not have signed anything at that age. My parents had signed on my behalf when I was still a minor. My attorney addressed the judge directly. For 19 years, the plaintiffs have maintained a policy that would profit them upon their daughter's death. They have paid premiums faithfully every single year. They never told her it existed. Does this sound like parents who saw their daughter as family, or does this sound like parents who saw their daughter as an investment? I watched the judge's expression harden as she studied the documents. Then came the emails. Through the discovery process, my attorney had obtained electronic records going back years. A chain of messages from 6 years ago appeared on the courtroom screen. My mother had written, "Lauren is doing something with computers. She mentioned some business thing at dinner. We should find out more. If it becomes anything, we need to make sure we're protected." My father had texted Derek, "Your mom found a lawyer who can draft something about family financial obligations. Some kind of agreement that kids support parents. Make it look official. Get Lauren to sign it next time she visits. Tell her it's for estate planning or something. She won't read the details." Derek had replied, "She's not stupid, Dad." My father's response, "She's naive. She still wants us to love her. Use that." I had never visited. I had never signed anything, but their intent was now permanently on court record. They had not been reacting to my success. They had been planning to capture it before it even existed. My attorney called one final witness. The courtroom door opened, and a woman in her early 60s walked in. She had silver hair, a calm expression, and she carried a folder of her own. My mother turned around to look, and her face went white. "That's not possible," she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's dead. She's been dead for 30 years. Grace Chambers took the stand. She looked directly at my mother and spoke clearly. "I'm not dead, Helen. You just told everyone I was because it was easier than admitting what you did." Grace testified about her own experience 30 years earlier. She had been the original scapegoat in our family, the one who paid the bills, covered the debts, sacrificed her own dreams so others could thrive. When she finally set boundaries and refused to give more, they cut her off completely. They told relatives she had mental illness and had disappeared. Eventually, they simply told people she had died. Grace opened her folder and presented old letters from my mother demanding money and threatening estrangement if she did not comply. The same language, the same tactics, the same pattern, exposed across 3 decades. Then Grace delivered her most important testimony. The family financial obligation they mentioned in those emails? That's exactly what they told me 30 years ago. They claimed we had a family tradition where successful children support their parents. There is no such tradition. They invented it. They tried to get me to sign a similar document back then. When I refused, I became dead to them, literally dead in the story they told everyone. The family tradition was exposed as a complete fabrication, a con, a script they had been using for 2 generations. Derek was called to testify next. Under cross-examination, facing his own emails and text messages displayed for everyone to see, facing the weight of everything he had stayed silent about for years, he finally broke. He said he knew what our parents were doing. He had always known. He knew about the loan they took in my name. He knew about the insurance policy. He knew they were planning to go after me if I ever made money. He knew everything, and he said nothing. My attorney asked him why. Derek looked at our parents, then at me. For the first time there was something genuine in his expression. Not guilt exactly, but exhaustion. He said he was the favourite, and he knew if he said anything, they would do to him what they did to Aunt Grace. What they did to me. He admitted he was a coward who chose comfort over doing the right thing. Our parents stared at him in disbelief. Their golden child had just betrayed them on the witness stand, but Derek was not looking at them anymore. He was looking at me. He said he was sorry. He knew it was too late, but he was sorry. The judge asked if I wanted to make a statement before closing arguments. I stood. No tears. No rage. Just clarity. I said that when I was 19, my mother told me I would figure it out, because I always did. She was right. I figured out how to pay off a debt I never owed. I figured out how to build a company from nothing. I figured out how to survive without a family, but I never figured out why they treated me this way or what I did wrong. The answer I finally understood was nothing. I did nothing wrong. Some families just have a person they designate to use. For 30 years it was Aunt Grace. When she escaped, they needed a replacement. That was me. I told the judge I was not there for revenge. Revenge would mean I still cared what they thought of me. I did not. I was there because a little girl spent her whole life believing she was broken and unlovable. She deserved someone to stand up for her. No one ever did, so I was doing it now. I did not want their love anymore. I just wanted what I always deserved, to be left alone. The judge announced the verdict would come the following morning. I walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun. Aunt Grace was waiting on the steps. We looked at each other, 2 women who had survived the same family 30 years apart. She extended her hand. I took it. Whatever happened tomorrow, I had already won something more important than money. I finally had family. The next morning I returned to the courthouse with Aunt Grace by my side. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Her ruling was decisive and absolute. She stated that the plaintiffs had presented no credible evidence of financial or emotional support for the defendant. The evidence instead demonstrated a pattern of exploitation, identity theft, fraud, and emotional manipulation spanning decades. The claims of family investment and financial obligation were without merit and appeared to be fabrications designed to extract money from the defendant. Case dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never file this lawsuit again. I was awarded attorney's fees totaling $95,000. I kept every dollar of my $10 million. But the judge was not finished. She addressed my parents directly, her voice cold and formal. She stated that the evidence presented regarding identity theft, forgery, and potential insurance fraud warranted further investigation. She was referring this matter to the district attorney's office for criminal review. I watched my mother's face drain of colour. For the first time in my life, I saw her without a mask. She looked old. She looked afraid. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman whose lies had finally caught up with her. 3 months later, my mother was formally charged with identity theft and forgery. She accepted a plea deal to avoid trial, 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and $65,000 in restitution to me for the loan plus interest. A restraining order prohibited her from contacting me for 5 years. My father, charged as an accessory, received 12 months of probation and mandatory enrollment in a gambling addiction program. Neither went to prison, but both now had felony records. They could no longer vote. They could no longer pretend to be respectable members of their community. The mask they had worn for decades was permanently removed. The financial consequences multiplied quickly. Between the $95,000 in legal fees they owed me, the $65,000 in restitution, and the $200,000 my father still owed to the loan shark, My parents were financially destroyed. They sold the family home, the same house where I was told I would never amount to anything. The irony was not lost on me. If they had simply left me alone, they would still have everything. Their greed destroyed them. In a small Ohio town, news travels fast. The local newspaper covered the trial with a headline that read, "Parents sue daughter for self-made fortune, exposed for identity theft and decades of fraud." The church community where my mother once held leadership positions quietly asked her not to return. Relatives who had once admired the perfect family now avoided eye contact in grocery stores. The neighbours who used to receive Christmas cards showcasing family happiness now whispered when they saw my parents drive by. The image my mother had spent a lifetime constructing was gone. The performance was finally over. 4 months after the verdict, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. It was my mother, calling from a relative's phone to get around the restraining order. Her voice was smaller now, cracked and weak. She begged me to talk, said she just wanted to explain, reminded me that she was still my mother. I was silent for a long moment. Part of me, the part that had spent 30 years trying to earn this woman's love, wanted to say yes. But then I remembered the voicemails, the stolen money, the life insurance policy, the text calling me her greatest disappointment. I told her no. I said she was never my mother. She was a landlord, collecting rent on a child who never asked to be born into her house. I had paid that rent for 30 years, and I was done. I told her I hoped she found peace, but she would not find it through me. I hung up, reported the restraining order violation, and blocked the number. There was no anger, there were no tears. Just a door, finally closed. Derek reached out separately through a handwritten letter. 3 pages long, written carefully, he did not make excuses. He admitted everything, that he knew what our parents were doing, that he benefited from their favoritism, that he was a coward who chose comfort over doing the right thing. He wrote that he was not asking for forgiveness because he did not deserve it. He was just asking for a chance to prove he could be different through years of action, not words. I wrote back a short reply. I told him I did not forgive him, and might never forgive him. But I did not hate him either. I thought he was as much a victim of our parents' system as I was, just in a different way. I was open to seeing who he might become, but there would be no shortcuts, no parents as middlemen, no asking for anything. If he showed up differently for 5 years, we could talk. Until then, I wished him well from a distance. It was not reconciliation. It was a door left slightly open. Aunt Grace and I began building a real relationship. Weekly dinners became our ritual. She shared stories of her own escape, how she rebuilt her life in Portland, became a librarian, found peace in books and solitude. She told me about the years she spent in therapy learning that she was not broken. She admitted she wanted to reach out sooner but was afraid they would use her against me. When she saw me on the news, she knew I was strong enough to survive them. She just hoped she could help me not be alone when I did. I showed her my evidence folder, 7 years of documentation. She laughed, then cried. She said she had kept everything too. She thought she was being paranoid. Turns out we were both just survivors. Grace gave me something precious, the original photograph from the family album, before anyone was cut out. 3 women smiling together, my grandmother, my mother as a teenager, and Grace. All of them happy, before everything went wrong. She told me it was the only one she had, and she wanted me to have it now. I framed that photograph and hung it in my new home, a modest house with a big garden, far from Ohio. On the wall beside it hang 2 other pictures, a new photo of Grace and me smiling together, and my company acquisition announcement. 3 chapters of my life side by side. These days I spend my time mentoring young women entrepreneurs, teaching them what I learned the hard way. My therapist calls it transforming pain into purpose. Every week, Grace comes over for dinner. She always brings too much food because old habits are hard to break, and I always help her eat it because new habits are worth building. We laugh together over ordinary meals on ordinary evenings. And that is exactly what I always wanted. Ordinary days with someone who loves me. Not because of what I can provide, just because of who I am. Someone once asked me if I regretted any of it. They said my parents were still my family. I told them family is not blood. Family is not obligation. Family is not people who see you as an investment. Family is who shows up when you have nothing to offer and stays anyway. When I had nothing, they were not there. When I had everything, they only wanted to take it. That is not family. That is a transaction. My mother was right about one thing. I did figure it out. I always do. Just not the way she expected. I figured out how to survive being used. I figured out how to build something real. I figured out how to stand up in a courtroom and tell the truth about people who spent my whole life lying about me. And Aunt Grace taught me the most important thing. You can survive being erased. You can rebuild from nothing. You can find your people, even if it takes 30 years. I am not a victim anymore. I am just a woman who finally stopped paying rent on her own existence. And that is worth more than $10 million. Lauren's story teaches us something that many of us learn too late. Not everyone who calls themselves family deserves that title. Blood relation does not give anyone the right to exploit you, manipulate you, or treat you as an asset to be used. If someone in your life only reaches out when they need something, if they dismiss your achievements while celebrating others, if they make you feel like a burden for simply existing, those are not people who love you. Those are people who use you. And you have every right to walk away. The most powerful thing Lauren did was not winning the lawsuit or keeping her money. It was the moment she stopped seeking approval from people who were never going to give it. She stopped paying emotional rent to people who saw her as property. She chose herself. And that choice changed everything. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt unseen or undervalued by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories like this one. Hit the notification bell to join our community of survivors, dreamers, and fighters. Thank you for listening.